Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Curtis. I'm the Humanities Coordinator here at the Ransom Center, and it's my happy task to welcome you this evening. We have an excellent program, but I need to remind you to silence your cell phones, if you would, so that they don't interrupt us. The evening is sponsored by Humanities Texas, which is the Texas affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it's co-sponsored by the Harry Ransom Center. We're very pleased to have two such distinguished and prolific authors this evening, but they will be introduced by our moderator, Karen Olsson. She is the former editor of the Texas Observer and is a contributing editor at Texas Monthly. She's also the author of the novel Waterloo, which I think is the best novel ever written about modern Austin. So, Karen?
So yesterday I was talking with Archer Mayer, and I found out there is a secret connection between these men, which I did not know about beforehand, which is that they both held the same job at one point in the 70s and 80s, or you held it in the late 70s, early 80s, which was Special Projects Editor at University of Texas Press. So that's the first thing I'm going to tell you about them. And now I'm going to tell you some things from Wikipedia, which is that Archer Mayer is the author of 23, is it, novels about Joe?
23 novels and 2 history books.
Yeah, 23 novels about Vermont detective Joe Gunther, and also 2 works of history. You have lived in many, many places, including Austin at one point. And you now live in Newfane, Vermont, and write about Vermont. And you seem to write these books incredibly frequently. You write one every year. And somehow still find time to be on the, to do a lot of community activities, including you're volunteer for the fire department, and you are a death investigator for the Vermont State Medical Examiner's Office, which sounds fascinating. David Lindsey grew up here in Texas, in South Texas and West Texas, and has lived here in Austin since 1970. He also held this launching, job, which is apparently a launching pad, great literary success, Special Projects Editor at the University of Texas Press.
Right. That's why they abolished it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And he has also been prolific, but written a number of different kinds of books, all kind of, I don't know whether you call them mysteries or thrillers or suspense or somewhere in that area.
Anywhere, yeah.
But you have also taken time off recently, I guess, to explore a television project. Yeah. And so you've done quite a diverse number of things and are now back to writing novels under a new name, which is, I forgot to write down.
That's okay. It's just going to be one book that way.
Oh, that's just
that's
the one book, and you're going to go back to the, okay, well, I look forward to asking you about that. And that was Paul Harper, is that? Okay, yeah. Good. All right, so those are introductions. And to get started, I noticed, there's something that I think when you read advice to young writers, something that they'll say is you should write the kind of books that you read, or write the kind of thing that you gravitate toward naturally as a reader. And so I was interested to find out in looking at interviews online and stuff you guys had written about yourselves, it doesn't sound like either of you followed that advice. You did something,
I didn't know that.
You did something totally different. So I'd like to hear both of you talk about how you fell into your particular line of work.
Okay.
Fall first.
Okay. Okay. I've always wanted to write ever since I was a small boy, but I grew up in a very conservative West Texas community. And writing didn't really seem particularly responsible. It wasn't, actually. It was irresponsible. So I pursued all sorts of other things over the years, but when I was working at UT Press, left there, and I turned 35 at that time. And I thought, well, I'm going to hold my nose and dive in. And So I had written a lot before that, but had never shown that to anyone, didn't pursue it actively. And so I also, in keeping with, I had 2 children who were in junior high at that time, grade school perhaps, earlier. And I knew it wasn't, I couldn't just launch out and write anything and expect to get any remuneration off of that. So I did some research to see what kinds of books sold best generally over decades. And it turned out to be that crime novels and mystery novels was that category. I had never read those, and I went out and I bought, I remember 26. I bought 26 crime and mystery novels, both European and American, and both the classic and the new people at that time, and read all of those, and wrote 100 pages and sold it, and that's how I got started. So it was very serendipitous and calculating at the same time. It was an odd way to approach.
And of those 26 novels, was there one that you used as your model to write those first 100 pages?
No, I couldn't name them if I had to right now.
You threw them out?
I don't. No, I've got them somewhere, but I just don't remember. Yeah.
Wow. And so, tell us about your.
Well, my approach was a little different. I was brought up literally in the back seat of a car. I moved around so frequently, as you alluded, that I had no sort of sword hanging over my head from a cultural basis to inhibit me from doing anything I wanted to do, mostly with no parental guidance either. So I was a real street kid. So I was out there doing whatever I wanted to do. I left home at the age of 14, and I just had, so I did read murder mysteries when I was a young man, but they were the classics. I read, of course, Sherlock Holmes, a little bit of Agatha Christie. I didn't like her at all because she doesn't develop her characters. So I began to understand that it's human beings I really want to write about, and not these convoluted plots that can only be sorted out by short, egotistical Belgians. So I not a prejudice, don't get me wrong. But little gray cells, maybe I have so few myself. That's one of the reasons I didn't want to go down that route. So I read these things, I enjoyed them recreationally, but they were just brain candy kind of stuff, and I walked away from it. But during this magical job that we both shared, I was there before you, and as part of that, I committed one of the biggest mistakes that you can commit as an editor of any stripe for a scholarly press, at least in the 1970s. And that was, I made, and I'll use a technical publishing term, a piss pot worth of money. Okay? I put the University of Texas Press on the bestseller list for 6 months because I found something in, where else? The HRC. It was the Book of Merlin, written by T.H. White, but never published by him because it was a pacifist tract, and it was to be published during World War II. Well, we didn't want to go there. That was very bad karma and poor taste, so left that sucker alone, and we left the manuscript alone as a result. So I found it upstairs, coerced the director at the time, who was famous for his Robert Hall suits, to publish this. I hope he's dead, because I get in trouble otherwise. So we had this book published, and it got to be a big deal. And the University of Texas called up Mr. Robert Hall and said, oh my goodness, this is fabulous. I mean, you have more than matched your endowment, your annual reach into the back pocket sum that we give the University of Texas Press. So you don't need an endowment, you just need to send this bright young man out there and have him find another bestseller. Well, the director was horrified, totally horrified, just holy jeez. He didn't want to buy insurance covering me, so basically he came to me, and remember that office? Told me, don't leave the office ever again. Your special project has now become opening mail. So I was sitting in my office, dying of boredom, and immediately thought of a murder mystery. Guess who the first corpse looked like, dressed in a Robert Hall suit. And what I did was I conjured up a book that had something to do with why Charles Whitman shot all those people from the nearby tower. This actually, wasn't so terribly long away in time at that point. One thing led to another. That was, by the way, unpublishable. I mean, it was just the worst possible. You have written the best book about modern Austin. I wrote the worst book, period, in the history of literature. and then I followed it with about 4 more feeble attempts. But they were wonderful exercises in typing. I challenge you, when was the last time any of you guys wrote 300 pages of anything? It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be done. So I did it again and again and again, and I felt better and better, and I acquired a voice. But I did the exact same research you did, David. At that point, knowing I couldn't leave my office, so what can I do that might actually be a little better than the garbage I'm actually turning out? I don't know, thrillers or love stories or whatever it was, and regional, character-driven, serial murder mysteries or police procedurals, that seemed to be the way to go. So I followed exactly your advice, in effect, without having sought it out or been given it.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, but as a result, do I read murder mysteries now? No, not at all. They couldn't interest me less, and many times it's because, to add to my resume, I'm also a police officer. The work I do for the medical examiner's office, is a quasi full-time job, and I write these murder mysteries. My idea of a good evening is not curling up with a murder mystery. I mean, what you guys do for recreation is work to me, and I don't want to mess with that stuff. But I do want to write about human beings. I want to write about people under stress, jammed up, conflict resolution, why-done-its, not who-done-its. And that's what keeps me going, book after book after book. Now I can't shut up, you may have noticed, sorry. But I turn these books out almost compulsively because I've become Vermont's social anthropologist. I don't actually care about the murder. I've gone halfway through a book and then gone, oh, damn, I forgot to kill somebody. And gone back and supplied a handy corpse. But that's why I don't read murder mysteries much, because I don't even want to write them.
And so where did Joe Gunther come from? At what point did he enter the picture?
Joe Gunther is the perfect everyman. That's why he has that boring name. What's your new name? That's a lovely new name. I like that. Paul Harper?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's way cool. Now, Joe Gunther just lies on the ground and dies. Paul Harper, that's got hair on it. I like that.
That came from, do you remember a movie called Harper?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember who starred in it?
Yes, Paul Newman.
Well, that was where I got the name.
Yeah. It was based on
Stole that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I love that movie, and I immediately thought of that when you mentioned that name. I thought,
did you really? Good for you.
Yeah, no, I saw your plagiarism from a mile away.
Well, he's only going to be good for one book, so that's it anyway.
Too bad. Well, hey, you say that now, but if it's a bestseller, you watch.
It's already past that point.
Now, David, you've set your books in Houston and Guatemala and San Francisco, and your last book, I think, rose out of an interest in private security contracting?
Yeah, forever, I think I've been interested in intelligence work. And what happened to the country in the aftermath of 9/11 was really, really enormously important for the way this country functions with its intelligence programs. And to be brief about it, when 9/11 happened, we realized we were in a way different kind of asymmetrical situation, war. And that all happened on the tail of, during the Clinton administration's, us downsizing our intelligence agencies in this country. So we had been pulling back. The Cold War was over with, and everything was done. Everything was going to be great again. No more Russians. And so we basically very rapidly downsized the intelligence. Well, those people who left basically went into private practice. They hired out to corporations. They hired out to foreign countries. They worked for everybody they could because they had special skills, obviously, that weren't marketable easily. So when 9/11 happened, the CIA, all those agencies, there are 16 intelligence agencies that this country relies upon, reached out to all of those exes that they had gotten rid of and said, we need help, we don't have the legs for this. So they drew all of these people in. And in the course of the years that have followed since 2001, we have created an empire of private intelligence agencies. And whereas before 9/11 we were obsessed with pulling in our intelligence and holding it close to us, now we were farming out our intelligence gathering to private companies who are in the business for profit. And there are many people who are in the business of intelligence now who are working for the government, employees of the government, who are fearful that we've created a monster, that this is going to eat us up. That's a sovereign nation's intelligence cache being handled by people working for profit doesn't seem to go quite well together. And I think we're in for some surprises along the way and as a result of that. And so I became fascinated by that, and the more research I did on it, the more I felt like it could sustain some novels. Right. And so that is the first one. Pacific Heights is the first one that is going to deal with that business.
And so I have two questions, I guess. One is, how do you go about researching something so massive and also so secretive? And two, how do you take that vast subject area and get it into a novel? Where does the novel start? Okay, well,
the research is done the way we've always done research, except today, with the digital era being what it is, we have vast amounts of what they call open source information available to us now. Very few things are hidden, although we know that so much is hidden, but so much more is not hidden now that used to be. And so there's a lot. And also I rely on people like Dana Priest at the Washington Post, who wrote a very, very, very good book on the subject a couple of years ago. And there's no shortage of research also. It just so happens that Austin has a very large collection of retired CIA officers here. And that's just our good fortune. Right. I think you could say that.
The rest are in Vermont.
Yeah, I would believe that. Well, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
But we do have a good little collection of them here. Now, as to how we tell that story, that's where I have come up against a problem. Because I made a proposal to my publisher to tell a story, this story, over a series of 6 or 8 novels. And they loved the idea, and so I began Pacific Heights being the first one. Well, when I turned in the new novel called Sorrow's Spy, they said, oh, well, we don't know. Maybe we misunderstood you. This isn't going to be the way it was. But the concept that I had was that this would not be a series of novels, but one story told in a series of novels. Right. The plot would continue from story to story, basically like a soap opera or an HBO series. And that has not really been done before with these kinds of novels in this genre. Right. And it kind of freaked them out. And so, without going too much into that, basically they wanted me to kind of redo the novel so that it didn't depend quite so much on the story that preceded it. Right. They wanted a string of pearls instead of a string. And so we're talking about that now. I've just finished an approach in which I'm trying to satisfy both myself and my publisher. And it's a very interesting operation.
Well, that's really interesting, because I think although we live in a world where we kind of talk about the decline of our attention span and everything's in these short, emails now, at the same time, it seems like our favorite TV shows, or the ones that get the most critical acclaim, are these long narratives. And both of you, in some sense, are working now in these long arcs, and you have continuing characters and relationships that prevail over novels. Maybe do you want to talk about that a little bit, about kind of how you think of your narrative arcs, because there's some of them that span.
Yeah, I've now just finished my 24th, which I sent off to the publisher. So, and I'm conjuring up, the guts of the 25th, and they are merely book-length chapters to a single book. I see this as an endless narrative about the same folks with people coming and going in the same setting, which is Vermont and environs, and I'm very liberal that way. My guys will go to New York or Montreal or Chicago or wherever they need to go in order to bring pieces of the puzzle to the fore. But I'm a big believer in this continuum, this using the wink and nod fictional vantage point to talk about far more interesting and serious things than cat murders or baking murders or chocolate murders or any of the other trash that fills our genre.
Yeah.
I'm delighted to hear that you're engaged in this, because that's, as I progress, the only really evolution that I've made is that they become less and less police procedurals and more novels with dead people.
Right. Now
and then, just for you guys. And I find that to have hit a response among my readers, which are growing in number, I think in large part because they see themselves. They can understand that this is interesting stuff. And it is, I think we're all touching, it's sort of like Downton Abbey with listening devices and machine guns.
Yeah, exactly. I think what is interesting to me, having gone through this process for the last couple of years and doing this, because I've been thinking about this novel in many volumes for 3 years. But I'm finding it very difficult to get the publishers to let me do that. Even though, here's the thing, storytelling is never going to go away. We are human beings, and part of our DNA is to tell stories. That's always going to be what we do. But whether we tell them on paper or around a campfire or on our iPhones or on our computers, we are going to tell stories and we're going to consume stories. And I find it interesting that the publishing industry is so reluctant to explore a simply different kind of paper. They're very reluctant to do that. They're really scared of a long arc. And I think the deal, well, I don't know what the deal is about that. I've talked it to death with my wife, who's sick of it, and with my agent, who's sick of me, and with the publisher, who's sick of it all. But it just seems like a wonderful opportunity to do something really big and really different. Now, if my writing doesn't hold up, then that's one thing. But the concept, they ought to be willing to explore innovation. I just am frustrated by that.
My feeling, frustration totally shared. My agent asked me, well, what do you think about this publishing situation? Because there was something that had caught her attention. And I said, publishing is a flotilla of Titanic circling the same iceberg. Don't cry me a river. These people are remarkable for their lack of courage, insight, imagination.
Well, I wish I'd talked to you sooner. Golly, Archer, this is good.
Yeah, no. So the thing is, don't get mad, get even. And all those devices you just mentioned, okay, cool. So I contacted, fortunately, it was years enough ago that publishers would pull out something electronic and just go, ew, where's my manual typewriter? Well, I took advantage of that because any idiot could see that the electronic stuff was starting to really gain some momentum. So I said to them, those 14 books of mine that you've put out of print, can I have them back? Because you're not doing anything with them. And you're not going to be able to do anything with them. Just useless. I mean, just trash. And I got this landfill that needs help. And so they kind of went, well, whoever you are, sure. So they gave me lock, stock, and barrel, all my rights back.
You're kidding me.
I immediately created my own publishing house. And now most of my attention is being spent on alternatives to what they're doing. So do I publish a hardback through them every year? Sure I do, for the New York Times bestseller review or what, whatever it is. But my efforts, Margot in the back with whom I work on all this stuff, we are looking at a company or multiple companies that are completely focused on, if you have a good idea, go with it. And just ignore the publishers. These guys are just going down the tubes.
They really are. It's really frightening. What happened was I explained all of this to them in a meeting up in New York. They said, well, let's talk. And so we did, and I explained all of it, and they thought they understood it, and then they didn't. And then I sent them basically, I think it was a 7 or 8 page essay describing what this was. And I'm building a website that's going to go along with the novels. And part of the storytelling will take place on the website. So even though you read the novels, you won't be reading everything, part of it. And it's not just additional information, it's parallel plot. The plot actually affects each other as they cross like this.
Cool, that's great.
So, but that freaked them out. They really, really went nuts over that. And they said,
They're still looking for a plug in the wall. That's why.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I would have thought at least that they would have said, well, that's curious, let's explore that.
Yeah, you would.
But no.
I've had that meeting.
So I'm in the middle of that still. So.
Yeah, no, I wish you all the best, because I think that's the future. What you're dealing with there and what you're proposing is the way that we writers can begin to show some independence from a publishing business that has simply lost touch.
Yeah,
they're more comfortable with that Gutenberg Bible you all walk by the front door than they are with what's in your pocket. And which you use on a regular basis to cross-communicate. So if they didn't get the memo, then, I'll exploit them by getting published every year, but pay them any respect or credibility? Nah, I'm done with that.
But you're a little bit more harsh than I am.
Oh, I'm wicked harsh. Look where I come from, for God's sake. Hey, you saw the brochure. Who has the chainsaw?
Well, I feel like we could probably...
Sorry, did we take you?
No, we could probably... I could chime in and denounce the publishing industry too, but I'm going to bite my tongue here because we'll do the more of that after.
We should be biting ours also.
No, I just want to talk a little bit more about the process of writing your books. Now, Archer, I read, I think in an interview with you, that you often start with kind of a question. How would somebody respond to such and such a pressure or situation that rise up in your mind? For your most recent book, or the one you're working on now, or the one you just published, can you tell us what that question was? Or
well, my advantage is that I also work in a world in which people are doing appalling things to one another all the time. As a police officer, I just left a several-year stint investigating sex crimes against kids. That's about as close to the bottom of the barrel as I ever want to go. So now I'm doing homicides happily. That's a move up in the world. So. When you occupy, and then of course I've been doing the medical examiner death investigation for well over 10 years, and when you're standing over bodies in that capacity, you have full and complete access to everything about them. That's the job description. So I can go through their entire house, I can go through all their personal files, I can reconstruct their lives. Well, I love that job. I'm the happiest guy in the room,
How did you go from being a special projects guy and a writer to doing
Vermont.
that
There are only 12 people in Vermont.
You can just get any job you want in Vermont.
You show up at the door and you say, hey, I can breathe and spell and write, and that's good enough. I had people from both offices, the police and the medical examiners, they approached me and said, would you like a job? To which I responded, you do know I lie professionally for a living. That's okay. That was not a problem. This isn't going to float in Texas, but it works like thunder in Vermont because they're really, everybody needs help. All of us have 3 jobs there. That's just a standard.
Fantastic.
And as a result, everything feeds everything else. It's just terrific. I have other homicide detectives call me up and say, oh, we just bagged one of your books as evidence. Talk about good PR, So it all feeds itself, and I get from all that information. So, for example, a book I'm thinking of writing now has to do with hoarders. Why? Because I had a fascinating case involving three sisters, well, the two sisters and a mother who cohabitated, and were all three hoarders. They're all nuttier than fruitcakes too. So of course I have to choose different phraseology when I write the book. But Matter and Hatters, and it was fascinating for me to take apart these three lives because of the death of one or two of them, to figure out why they were the way they were. Well, that's sort of interesting, and it's also culturally interesting because there's a TV show now called Hoarders, which I've never watched. But for me, in a rural context, having discovered this, that's a question that will start me down the road of writing a book. Just like David said, that you had this question about this intelligence, and you fall across things as writers, and they catch your interest. And that's what starts these books. I mean, we're like blood brothers here, you know. Yeah. You just dress better.
It's not a contest. I read Patricia Highsmith, the writer Patricia Highsmith wrote a book once on, I think, writing mysteries, and I remember she said in it that something like, I'd always wanted to write a book in which a body is taken out of somewhere in a carpet. And she just had this in the back of her mind until she finally, figured out the carpet scenario. Do you all have things like that you're just kind of looking to place in a book, or is it more, as you're writing the book, things emerge for the book?
Yeah, I think I did a lot of what Archer did. When I first started doing this, once I got my first contract, I realized that I really didn't know what a police detective did. So I went to the Houston Homicide Division and began working with those people. And I did that for 20, 25 years, very closely. And so once you've been through that, like Archer, you don't want for plots.
Right.
You don't want for ideas. What I found myself having to do is to decide which of the ideas I had that I could use that would be commercially viable, because many of them aren't. Even though I would love to write them, and I think they would make great stories, our publishers are looking for commerce.
Right.
So I've always felt like I was walking a tightrope between being able to make the money my publisher wants me to make and writing well. Those don't always go together. But as far as the ideas go, there's never a dearth of ideas to pour into these novels. But as I changed from one genre to the other, from, say, mystery novels to thrillers to spy and espionage things, there was a point at which I wrote a really mean sort of book called Mercy. And that was the book at which I decided that I couldn't do that anymore. I can't, just like Archer, I can't do that anymore. It would affect me. And the research that I did for that book and the writing of that book just really bent me out of shape, and I did not do that anymore. So I gradually branched out into do other things, and eventually left the character that I was setting in Houston and picked up other characters and went on. But you find yourself, I find myself, I suppose we really can't generalize, we're so different, though so similar. But I find myself having an appetite for a certain kind of curiosity, having filled the appetite and the curiosity popping up somewhere else. And pursuing those curiosities is to me one of the great rewards of being a writer, because I think I would die if I was stopped being curious. It would kill me, if I couldn't do that. And we're very lucky. We're very fortunate to be able to make a living putting our curiosities on paper and letting other people read them. But it is a delicious sort of opportunity to have to write a novel, and the ideas are endless.
I had an uncle who was the curator of Metropolitan Museum of Art for many, many, many years, and he was curator of prints. Lovely guy, terribly erudite, reminded me of a chimpanzee. He was sort of short and wiry and worked his way into everyone's heart, so they would tell him and share with him most extraordinary things as he traveled the face of the earth and acquired stuff for the Metropolitan Museum, as well as knowledge, as well as tall tales. He was the guy you wanted on a tour of a chateau, for example, because he would tell you all the stuff that was not in the guidebook. And I once asked him, he didn't have a PhD, he didn't have a highfalutin education, he was not fancy as one regards it now, but he was considered one of the top 2 or 3 guys in the world in his job at that time. He's long dead now, he died in the late 70s. But I asked him once, you know, Hyatt Mayer, give me a break. I mean, that's a New Englander through and through. His first name was Alpheus Hyatt Mayer. So Uncle Hyatt and I used to share an appreciation for odd books and strange art and whatnot, but he always beat the pants off me. He spoke something like 8 different languages, including classical Greek. And I said, how did you get this way? How did you get so friggin' smart? You know, I guess is what I was working toward. And he looked at me and he said, a bottomless ignorance and curiosity. And I never forgot that. That's what drives you, that's what drives me. Ignorance and curiosity. You know? And you're right, it's a blessing to not have to dig a ditch for a living, where you merely aspire to satisfy that appetite. Instead, we can actually get paid to satisfy our needs. It's wonderful.
Now, getting back to something you said about mercy and kind of subject matter that you couldn't deal with it anymore. I mean, even so, you continue to write books, and you both write books in which there, you know, you occasionally cut people's tongues out or slash their heads off, or
Is that what you do?
And I'm just wondering, what is that like for you as a writing day? Do you look forward to that? Like, do you go out for a steak dinner afterward, or what?
I don't cut any tongues.
I don't know what you're referring to. Well, let's see, how do I say that? That once held an interest for me, less so as the years go by. For one thing, we are a glut. Is that a word? A glut? I think it is.
I like it. A glut.
We are a glut with that kind of thing in the public media now.
Right.
When I wrote Mercy, I told my publisher, I told my agent actually, I said, look, you know, this was one of the first 2 serial murder books ever written. And I said, look, I don't want to touch this stuff again. I said, this stuff is going to be so hot, you're going to have serial murders coming out the wazoo. This stuff is sensational, and I'm never going to do it again. Well, he never, ever stopped talking about it. Well, this isn't like Mercy, you know, this isn't like Mercy. This is, but it became true. Serial murders are under all of our seats all the time. It happens all the time. And it's a fascinating psychology. I can see why people would want to get into it and write about it, sort of, once. I can't see people living that life. And I'm really quite astonished that people want to read books about them. But, you know, it's that thing I'm getting away from. I saw enough murders in Houston to satisfy my murder curiosity. I did work with the FBI and intelligence divisions to find out about the psychology of the serial killer. Done that. I don't think I want to live with that anymore. And so I move on. Now, this is probably not the best thing for my career. Decidedly it isn't, because supposedly once you get something like that that really works, you're supposed to stick with it. But I simply could not do that. And the tongue thing you were reading about from the Mexico book, right? I think apparently. I wish you'd read a different book from that, but that's okay. Well, I mean, that's what happened down there. That's what I came across when I was researching the book. And it's just that I don't want to research that anymore. You know, I think I've sort of done that.
Right.
And the intelligence part of it, the intelligence stuff to me is much more chess than football.
Right.
The other books I felt like were football. The intelligence books that I've written are more like chess. And they're not as zazzy, and there's not as much, you know, what my agent calls rock and roll. There's much less rock and roll in these books. But they're far better books, I think. It's hold my curiosity strong.
In your supporting your defense, in effect, you make a mention of the cutting out of the tongue being a kind of a cultural norm in context, at least with what you were writing about. I didn't read that book, so I have no clue what the exact reference is. But I think in many ways, sometimes you don't have to have any appetite for this kind of stuff. If you are visiting a culture and its means of expression, you may well be put in a position of mirroring some of what you discover. And it could be bloody unpleasant. Now, I don't write about beheadings and tongue cuttings as a habit, but I did write a book about Asian crime, which was in context with illegal smuggling across the border in Vermont. So I began innocently enough, but when I dug into it, I found some pretty unpleasant means of communication, shall we say. And I had to mention that. I didn't give us sort of up-close camera work on these acts, but I made references to them, and they're pretty unattractive.
You know, that's interesting. When I first got into the business of doing this, I was working with the homicide division in Houston. I'll tell you, you know, as I said, I got into writing this kind of book by simply statistics. That wasn't my interest. But once I got into it, in those years, in the early 80s, all through the 80s, Houston was known as the homicide capital of the world. They were having more fun down there. It was an incredible scene. I was just awestruck and appalled of the number of murders. I would go there midweek. In those days, before cell phones, I had a pager. And every time there was a homicide, they would page me, and I would go to the crime scene. And I just saw so much appalling behavior. It's just exactly like you were talking about. And I made a pact with myself after the first book was published. And I said, you know, if I'm going to write about this stuff, if I'm going to write about this, I'm going to make it as repulsive as I find it. And those Hayden books, those books that took place in Houston, were rough, very rough things. And after I had sort of sated my I guess it was curiosity for that sort of thing, I didn't want to touch it anymore, really. But you can't get away from it if you're going to be in the genre. And I was not going to make it a tea cozy. That is not tea cozy, believe me. Those things that you see, those things that I saw, that is human waste in unimaginable proportions. And we see it more and more today because we have the capacity to see it more. Not only is our media bringing it to us, our social system is bringing it to us. And I don't know where this is going. I don't know where we take this kind of stuff as a society.
So has it changed, doing this kind of work and seeing these kind of things, has it changed your view of human nature over the years?
No, not at all. To me, I think, I have this philosophy that everything changes. Heraclitus is right. We do not step in the same river twice. It's constantly moving. It's a new river every time we go there. But I think that applies to everything except human nature. I don't know that Heraclitus addressed human nature in that discourse. But I think human nature never changes, and we're capable of sublime things and horrific things, and we all know that. We all know that. And how we explore that in our literature depends upon our talents, our tastes, and so many things. But no, I think human nature, I'm appalled at it, and I'm so in love with it. I've seen such wonderful things that people do, such selfless things. We've all seen that. Our media, the media that brings the world to us today, allows us to see ourselves up close. And we're appalled by what we see. The stuff I see on the internet is just horrible. And yet some of the best research I've ever come across is on the internet. So much more is in this media now. But no, I'm firm. I'm in there with human nature. I think it's not going to change, and we're never going to figure it out.
Well, I don't have a watch on, but I suspect it's time to take questions from the audience, if there are any.
You're officially on the hot seat.
Or I can ask more, but I don't.
Can't tell.
Okay. Anybody have any questions out there?
We dominate the conversation anyhow. All you have to do is just ask a little question, and then you get the ball rolling. There you go.
My sister lives in Vermont. We grew up here in Austin, and she's lived in Vermont since the early '80s, and I think she's always had like a couple of jobs, like you said.
Yep.
But when I first went to visit her, I had the conception that everybody in Vermont was cultured or something. She said to me, "Oh no, we have weird things happen here too."
Oh yeah, no, it's a state full of woodchucks, as we call them. I was listening to David's wonderfully eloquent, song to human nature, and total baloney. I have a far darker view of our species than I do. I bless you for that, because thank goodness you're on the side of light and harmony and righteousness. But I've just been walking in hip boots too long in this stuff to take much joy from it. And funnily enough, we all know Vermont, even if we can't locate it on the map, because we know it's the state that's got maple syrup, really cute cows, people sliding downhill, and colorful leaves every year. It's a beautiful state, right? But no one pays any, and in fact, it was number 5 in the Don't We Feel Swell About Ourselves survey that just came out a couple of days ago in the newspaper. Hawaii was number 1, Vermont was number 5. So we're a really groovy place. But under those layers, behind those cows, is a farmer who can't make ends meet, whose kid doesn't have an education, who's doing perfectly appalling things behind the barn, and on and on and on. And there are thousands of people in Vermont. We get nationally an economic sock to the jaw. None of us in Vermont notice it, because we are perpetually economically depressed. That's our natural state. As I commented, you 3 jobs, no big whoop. What the hell are you doing, you slacker? So we understand that that's just a norm, and that's okay. That's why I write these books, is because I wanted to get away from that Chamber of Commerce snapshot prettiness and talk about the realities of a state that's making do. And it does so on the bedrock of what humans do, sadly, I think, more naturally than acts of grace, which is they take care of number 1, and they oftentimes don't put a whole hell of a lot of thought into it. I used to think that all bad guys had to have bumper stickers that said it seemed like a good idea at the time, because then we could just arrest them before they even did anything, and shortchange the process of having to let them do their damage and then put all the pieces together after the fact. They are such impulse thinkers, and there's so many of them, because we only, we arrest the guys we catch, but are we catching everybody? No. So my view of humanity in general, and Vermont in particular, that's what I write about. I don't write about cutting heads off or sticking tongues out and getting them and losing them. I'm much more interested in how do we survive. That's why I have a happy thought that it would be nice if the light at the end of the tunnel weren't a locomotive. But most of the people I work with, that's what they're paid to do, is to deal with what the locomotive does to the stars in their eyes guys, And I personally remain an optimist. That's the irony of the whole thing. And that's why I can keep going and going and going, I guess, because I do believe that light is a real light and not a locomotive. But Vermont has become this perfect place for me to write from. And this goes back to what you were saying, David. Houston was a hellhole. Yep. Just bodies dropping, people, you're just stepping over them. In Vermont, we only kill about 20 people a year across the whole state. So in a way, everything counts. I open up my newspaper in the morning and I hear about a building fire in Burlington, which is as far away from my town as the map allows it to be. Hello? When was the last time you opened the Austin American-Statesman and you read about a building fire on the edges of Houston? Don't know? Don't care. It's not worthy. But in Vermont, it is, because there's so few of us and we cross-connect so much. So I have no idea what your question was, but that's my answer.
I hope no one else finds you. I liked what you had to say.
I'll take a question over here, and I'm supposed to repeat the question before either of you field it. So, what's your question?
One comment, I remember reading Mr. Lindsey years ago, and when I arrived in Houston, whether it's raining or not, I remember that driving a car in a Houston rainstorm is like being on a galactic outpost. That supreme isolation in your car with all the water. My question regards dystopian literature. Why? Why so much? Why now?
So the question is, why is there so much dystopian literature right now?
I'll take a flyer at that. I don't know how to answer your question, but I think people are feeling, okay, you remember in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a lot of well, when things began to accelerate at the beginning of the 20th century, art tended to reflect that disconnection. We have Dadaism and Surrealism and all those isms that came out of the turn of the century, or the first part of the last century now. But people will express their inner feelings in ways without, I think, sometimes even subconsciously. And I believe that I have a real belief that change we can all deal with. What is different about the change that we're experiencing today, in my view, is the acceleration of the change. It is happening more quickly than we can absorb, more quickly than we can adapt to, more quickly than we can understand. And I think that causes writers to try to explain life and try to explain the complexity and the acceleration of change through dystopian literature. They can imagine other ways, other better lives, I think better ways of living a life. But I really think that, and I've thought about this a lot, and I could completely be full of bull, but I really believe the rate of change is what is affecting us as much as the change these days, because it is so warp speed, everything that's happening. And I don't know when the last time was I had a conversation with any friend, and they didn't tell me, wow, we have been so busy. We just been slammed. We've just been so busy. Well, I'm not sure that we're even aware that we are feeling compelled to be busy. I think we are. We do feel compelled to be busy, and I think we are having to be busy as well. And I think it's all messing with us. I just think it really has an effect on our lives.
The question is, has either of you had a novel adapted for film or television?
Yes. Let's see. Mercy made it.
He says sorrowfully.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Of all the things that they could have bought, but that's a very good commentary about what we're talking about. Anyway, that has, and of course, studios have bought three other books, I think, that didn't make it to the screen, but I got paid for. So.
How did you feel about the adaptation of Mercy?
Pardon?
How did you feel about the adaptation of Mercy?
Well, look, Mercy, well, don't get me started. No, the book
He didn't even like the book to begin with, right?
Okay, the book, here's the deal. The book was set in Houston. It had a very, sense of place is a big deal with me. So it was full of atmosphere, let's put it that way. Well, they bought it and replaced the Hispanic heroine, the lead in the story, with just another woman, and set it in Canada. So I was through. I was through with it.
They love Canada, no unions, cheap rates. Yeah.
That's a good place to film.
Yeah.
But not that movie, not that. But that's a common gripe of writers. And it shouldn't be, because what we learn very quickly is if you don't want someone else to interpret your story, don't take the money. If you take the money, shut up.
That's what Grisham does. Yeah.
That's really, you have to do that. And it's legitimate. Let's imagine that I was a director or a screenwriter, and I gave them permission to retell my story. This writer gave me permission to retell his story. Then I would have every right to imply or to impose my creative abilities on that story as well. And also we need to remember that was a very long novel. That was almost 1,000 pages in manuscript, and they have to tell it in 120 minutes. So, you know, it's legitimate. What they do is legitimate, I think.
I never had a movie made, but similarly, contracts by probably over a dozen contracts, all of which went nowhere. Yeah. That's when I realized that movie making is all about not making movies. It's a big responsibility. If somebody somewhere says, okay, let's make this into a movie, then it's all on his head. And if the movie goes south, and most of them economically don't measure up to expectations, that guy gets fired. But the guy who said no, and continues saying no, and said no for 25 years, his career is golden. He did fine. You know? So that's kind of what we're looking at.
David, I'm just curious how you went about approaching the Houston Police Department to allow you to follow them around and get information. And also, how do you find ex-CIA agents in Austin?
Yeah, those are two good stories, actually. With the police all those years ago, that was stupidity. I just walked in and I said, look, you know, I got a 2-book contract and I need to learn about what I'm going to write about. And could you just, you know, I went to the Public Information Office, for Pete's sake, and said that like a grown-up. And they did me a wonderful blessing. They didn't know what to do with me, first of all. They never had anybody do that. That was way before this became common. And so they introduced me to a team of homicide detectives. And basically, the 2 guys I was introduced to, their job was, see if this guy was full of bullshit. If he was, don't have anything to do with him. If he's a nice guy, visit with him, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. You guys want him or not. So, you know, basically we became great friends, and I spent the next 25 years with those guys. And I became close to them, they became close to me, and they showed me a world that I still am astonished at. And, but that was the way it came about. It was very silly and very lucky. I was very, very fortunate, because those 2 guys turned out to be the most experienced team in homicide at that time. They were the oldest guys working there. And one of them was the nuttiest guy I've ever seen. They had a heart as big as this stage here. Wonderful guy. And they taught me that some of the best psychologists in the world are police officers, homicide detectives. The CIA thing became as a result of homicide detectives. I wanted to do some research that homicide detectives had to hand me off to the FBI. Later on, the FBI, when they got to trust you, and that's the whole point of all this, when they get to trust you, they handed me off to some CIA stuff later on. And then that, once you meet one of those guys, they all, you know, hand you off if they trust you. So.
Okay, I think our time is about up. Thank you guys so much for this discussion. Thank you all for coming.